Good morning. My name is Gary Scudder. I'm a professor here in the Corps, ably assisted by the excellent Catherine Wright, who is doing yeoman service today, including running upstairs. We're actually sitting in her office right now because we had battery issues. Today I want to talk about the anti-hero, which is a big subject in Core 270, Heroines and Heroes. And my students are funny because often they will literally somehow in their strange little student brain bring the anti-hero and the villain together. And I always tell them that if on their final paper, if they somehow confuse anti-hero and villain, I'm going to flunk them back to the Stone Age. But it's also a really big issue because it's increasingly a big part of American popular culture as our heroes get darker and darker and darker. So I think it's something they really need to understand. And I think I really set the stage for this from the beginning of the class, because day one is always syllabus day, and day two we always ask ourselves the question, what is a hero? And I did this thing this semester, which actually worked very well, wherein on this second day of class, when we were talking about what the hero is, I gave one of the students a marker and sent it to the board and said, okay, prepare to write. And I read to them the first couple pages of the Ramayana. And in it, they start talking about the virtues of the great Indian hero Rama, and they go on and on and on and on and on. And there's so many of them that it's ridiculous, and the student really cannot even keep up, which is sort of what I was looking for. So we fill up half the board with all the great virtues of Rama. And then I show them a couple minutes from the end of the first episode of Game of Thrones, wherein we meet Jaime Lannister, who in a space of 2 minutes both gets caught having sex with his sister and throws a 10-year-old boy out the window. And I said, what are Jaime Lannister's virtues? And they struggle, and if they have actually read the entire series, they might pick out something from season 4. But generally they can't come up with too many. And I said, but does that mean that Jaime Lannister is the villain of the story? And especially those who know the story go, well, yeah, no, not really. I said, okay, well in that case we have laid out parameters here for the hero. And somewhere in between these two is the hero. I said, but interestingly enough, I guarantee, because my students actually read a short retelling of the Ramayana in Heroines and Heroes. And I was telling them, along the way, I swear to you, every one of you will find Jaime Lannister a much more interesting and likable character than Rama, even though Rama is the definitive hero. And the question, of course, is why is this? This allows us then to eventually get into the notion of studying the anti-hero. And a lot of people have been doing a lot of work on this, much more intelligent work than I'm going to get into. But I stick with the very basic 5-level definition. With the easiest way to think about it is, as we get further and further down the list, we're getting further and further away from the ultimate perfect Superman-ish hero. So we start off with the classic anti-hero, which is just the anti-hero who still means well, does not really have a particularly dark character. It's just not a particularly great hero. If you're going to compare this classic anti-hero to Superman, then he's going to look bad. But we don't doubt his willingness to be a hero. Far from it. We may just doubt his ability to pull it off. And there's sort of a nice duality where you have either the great hero versus the not-so-great hero, the great warrior versus the not-so-great warrior, the very confident hero versus the not-so-confident hero. So that's a very easy one, and I always use the example of Spider-Man, which the students can get around their brains. Then we get into the notion of the Disney anti-hero, and that's where we begin to have a little bit moral, a little darker morally, though not too much so. It's mainly a hero wherein we doubt whether or not they will do the right thing. We don't doubt it too seriously, because the classic example I give them is Han Solo in Star Wars. It's all about me, sister, I want the money. But in the end, you don't really seriously think he's going to fly away and not show up, but at least you plant the seed. So a little more morally ambivalent. We're getting further away from perfection. Then you get into the third level, which would be the pragmatic anti-hero. And that's where you really have serious doubts about whether or not they're going to do the right thing. And the example I always give them is the John McClane character from Die Hard, where you go like, geez, are you doing this right thing because you want to, or is this solely a personal thing? Is the fact that you're doing the right thing because you believe in this greater good, or because it sort of coincides with something that you personally want to do? And we're getting a little darker, a little murkier. The fourth level is what we call the vicious anti-hero. An example I use is, if you've seen the movie In Bruges, which I think is a wonderful film, you've got these two hitmen who get sent off to Bruges because one of them has actually killed a child by mistake, and they're getting sent off there because one hitman is supposed to kill the other hitman, and everybody is very morally bankrupt, and you don't really know what to think of them. And so we're getting into this case of, is this guy even a hero? I mean, how do we justify this? Because they have sort of a moral universe. It's just not a moral universe that you or I would be particularly comfortable with. So we're getting sort of the vicious anti-hero. And finally, the fifth category is the hero, anti-hero name only. And I usually pick out Riddick from Pitch Black, who's a hero, even though he's probably a psychopathic killer, but he's better than the scary alien monsters. So yeah, he's a hero simply because there's no better options. So we have our sort of 5 categories there. And of course the problem is, are we getting closer? Where do, as the villains are becoming more complex, are we going to essentially meet in the middle? We've gone past the age where you had ultimate good versus ultimate evil. Like the Studs Terkel World War II was the good war. We could make sense of it. And somehow we're sort of merged in the middle somewhere, and it's much more complex. Now how do I do this in class? Well, I showed them a bunch of films, not only because I love films, but also I wanted to show them great films. And I try to show them the progression in American cinema of the anti-hero. And we start off with Humphrey Bogart in the early 1940s with Maltese Falcon. And I showed them a couple scenes from Maltese Falcon. One is the great scene where he goes in to see Sidney Greenstreet and Mr. Gutman, and they're talking about the Maltese Falcon, and Bogart throws a hissy fit. He's obviously clearly there just to fake being angry. And his point is, you need to think about me. When you're thinking about who this belongs to, who gets paid, there's me. And I show him that scene, and I step back and say, okay, now, where would we place Bogart? I said, granted, you've only seen like 3 minutes of this, but where would you place him? But then, and so we discussed for a little bit, and then at the end, I show them the end of it, where essentially he's turning the woman over, the woman he decided he loved, but who'd also killed his partner. And he has to explain why he's going to turn her into the police. And he says, well, I love you, but you killed my partner. And in the detective business, you always have to avenge your partner. And she says, wait a minute, would you have done this if the Maltese Falcon had been real? And he says, well, I don't know, maybe. But if it was real, that'd be a little bit more on your side of the ledger. So you're like, ah. So in the end, he does the right thing, but we sort of place this doubt about why the hell he's doing the right thing. And my students argue about this. He's getting somewhere between 2 and 3. He's somewhere between, the Disney anti-hero and the sort of more pragmatic hero. Like at the end, maybe if the Maltese Falcon had been real, he wouldn't have turned her in. I mean, who knows what he would have done. But we're sort of having this doubt. And I said, for the students, it's hard to sort of put yourself in the mind of 1941 where you just go, I don't know if I like this guy. I mean, he's sort of maybe the Jamie Lannister of that particular generation. We're sort of moving further away from fine. Then I showed them several scenes from the classic 1956 John Ford, John Wayne movie, The Searchers, which I think is the greatest Western of all time, and probably the top 5 or 10 greatest movies of all time. And we talk about John Wayne and, in some ways, the definitive anti-hero, the Ethan Edwards character. And, and obviously it was Wayne's favorite role because he actually named his son Ethan because of it, because he loved it so much. And, it's a really complex role, and I show them actually several scenes of it, which I will not regale you with all of them. Sometimes I just show them scenes because it's a great film, and I want them to understand that John Ford was a great director. But you can see why John Wayne likes the role, and what you get a sense, for those of you who don't know the film, and by the way, if you don't, shame on you, hold your intellectual manhood cheap, because it is a great, great film. And the story is John Wayne is he takes off on his 10-year adventure across the West to find his niece, who's been kidnapped by this Indian tribe. And it deals with all sorts of stuff. And it really, really delves into the concept of American racism. Because what you realize about the John Wayne character is he really is a pretty nasty racist. And he is unapologetic about it. There's this one iconic scene of him looking at these captured white women, and he says, they ain't white anymore. And it's just a look of hatred on his face. And pretty soon what you begin to get in your mind is a sense of, is he actually going to after his niece because he loves her, because he's going to kill her? And the young man who travels with him literally believes, and the young man continues to go on the journey because he thinks Wayne is going to kill her. And at the end, he saves her and takes her home and drops her off. But then he turns around and leaves. And the door closes in one of the great cinematic scenes of all time. And I was asking my students, what do we do with John Wayne? What do we do with this particular role? And the students argue about that a lot. And they usually have him, he's somewhere between 3 and 4, because he's really a racist. He's not very pleasant. He does the right thing, but he doesn't stay. There's a reason he doesn't stay, because he's been transformed in this Campbellian way and he can't stay. Or is he literally saying because he doesn't want to spend time with someone who spent that much time with Indians? They don't spell it out to us. So again, they usually say he's somewhere between 3 and 4. Okay. Then I show them the end of Robert De Niro and Taxi Driver. Back in the days when Robert De Niro was a legitimate, real actor and was almost a force of nature. And we talk a little bit. And actually, some of the students have actually seen it. None of them have seen Maltese Falcon or The Searchers, but a goodly number of them have seen Taxi Driver. And we get the sense of, what kind of hero is Robert De Niro in this? I mean, he is fixated on this young prostitute played by Jodie Foster. He wants to assassinate a public official. In the end, he shows up and kills an entire brothel full of pimps. And he's recognized as a hero. And we try to get our brain around what's going on here. And eventually the students go, well, he's clearly like a 4 or a 5. And so what we're getting is this nice sort of progression. And the students sort of get it. And you get to show some movies. And they sort of understand how this actually plays itself out. What's nice is it also falls back naturally into a discussion about almost a psychological, sociological discussion of who we are as Americans. Why are our anti-heroes getting darker and darker and darker? And does this say that we're actually just more sophisticated intellectually and culturally, or we're just so morally ambivalent that we no longer can get our brains around ultimate good? It's the same reason why, you know, Game of Thrones is probably this generation's Lord of the Rings, and neither generation that produced it would understand the other one particularly well. So, yeah, again, either we're just sophisticated or we're just very morally bankrupt. And the final example I give them is a very strange one, and that is professional wrestling. Because traditionally in professional wrestling, there are the 2 categories. There are faces and heels. And baby faces are the ultimate good guys, and the heels are the bad guys. And never the twain shall meet. And one of the first guys who sort of straddled the 2 areas was Ric Flair, the Nature Boy. But generally, you'd go back and forth pretty effortlessly. And you, a scriptwriter for wrestling, would know exactly what button to push when it was time to shift your wrestler from one category to another. And there's been some studies about this recently that increasingly the guys who write this don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to read their own audience. Because now the faces, the baby faces, the good guys are getting darker and darker. And even guys like the ultimate babyface John Cena are booed by half the audience. And the things you used to be able to do that would signal the transition from babyface to heel doesn't work anymore. So unless you literally have wrestlers grabbing nuclear weapons, the audience doesn't react anymore, which is, I think, symbolic of the same way. As we've progressed down this list of the anti-hero, we don't even know what we want with them anymore. Except that we don't really like nice, clean heroes. Which means that even when we do something like Superman anymore, cinematically, we have to find some way to besmirch him. Otherwise, we don't really care about them. So anyway, they seem to understand this very well. I always do this every year. It always works remarkably well. And as always, because I'm the king of all PowerPoints, I'm happy to loan you my PowerPoint with lots of embedded YouTube links, or just talk to anyone about this who would like to. Thank you very much.